You've been wronged, accused, attacked. Every fiber of your being screams to defend, to justify, to meticulously dismantle every lie. Yet, what if that instinct, noble as it feels, is the very trap designed to ensnare you? What if the moral high ground is precisely where your enemies want you, exposed and vulnerable, while they dictate the battlefield? Imagine a different path, one where silence isn't weakness, but a weapon, where an accusation, instead of demanding your defense, becomes the catalyst for your unassailable ascent. In the grand theater of human interaction, from the boardroom to the public square, there is a pervasive, almost instinctual, drive to defend oneself when challenged. When accusations fly, when criticisms land, when one's integrity or actions are called into question, the immediate, overwhelming impulse is to respond, to clarify, to justify, to meticulously present evidence, facts, and intentions that we believe will vindicate us and silence our detractors. This, we are taught, is the path of honor, the way of the righteous. But look closely, and you will see that this well-trodden path is, more often than not, a meticulously laid snare. Consider the common man, steeped in the idealism of fairness and truth. When confronted, he meticulously gathers his arguments, prepares his counterpoints, and engages in a verbal duel, believing that the sheer force of his logic and the purity of his intentions will inevitably prevail. He sees the world as a court of law, where evidence and reason are the ultimate arbiters. He believes that if he can just explain himself clearly enough, if he can just present his side convincingly, justice will be served and his reputation will be restored. This approach, while appearing virtuous and intellectually sound, is rooted in a fundamental misapprehension of human nature and the dynamics of power. It assumes that people are rational, that they seek truth above all else, and that their judgments are based solely on objective facts. This is the fatal flaw of the idealist. He bases his strategy not on how men are, but on how they ought to be. The idealist, by engaging in defense, immediately grants legitimacy to the accusation. He steps into the ring, under the rules set by his opponent, and begins to fight on ground that is inherently disadvantageous. Each attempt to clarify reinforces the notion that there was something to clarify in the first place. Each justification, however eloquent, subtly suggests that there was indeed a need for justification. He becomes reactive rather than proactive, forever chasing the narrative set by others. He is forced to address criticisms that, left unaddressed, might wither and die, but when acknowledged gain a new potent vitality. He expends valuable time, energy, and mental resources trying to patch holes in his reputation, holes that were often deliberately created by an adversary whose sole aim was to distract, discredit, and diminish. This is how the majority fall victim to their own morality, becoming entangled in webs of their own making, paralyzed by their need to be seen as good or right in a world that seldom rewards such purity. Now, let us turn our gaze to the stark, unvarnished wisdom of Niccolo Machiavelli, a mind that stripped away the comforting illusions of human nobility to reveal the brutal, unchanging truths of power. Machiavelli, observing the endless machinations of princes and states, did not concern himself with what should be, but with what is. His philosophy offers a path, not to moral purity, but to pragmatic efficacy, a path where the prince learns how not to be good. This is not an endorsement of malevolence, but a recognition that in a world populated by individuals who are ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, covetous, adherence to conventional virtues can be a death sentence. The Machiavellian approach to being accused, criticized, or attacked is radically different. It begins with the understanding that real power does not reside in the purity of one's intentions or the righteousness of one's actions, but in the capacity to control perception, to shape reality, and to use both virtue and vice as mere instruments towards the singular goal of acquiring and maintaining stability and control. For the astute strategist, an accusation is not an emergency demanding defense. It is a strategic maneuver by an opponent, and as such, it demands a strategic counter-maneuver, not an emotional reaction. Machiavelli understood that men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, because everyone can see but few can feel. Everyone sees what you appear to be, few know what you really are. This is the cornerstone of his approach to reputation. When faced with an attack, the wise leader does not rush to expose what he really is, the truth, but rather focuses on meticulously managing what he appears to be. Defending oneself is an act of exposure, an attempt to align the external perception with the internal reality. But what if the internal reality is complex, nuanced, or simply irrelevant to the strategic objective? What if the external perception, crafted with deliberate intent, is far more potent than any factual defense could ever be? The Machiavellian prince knows that by refusing to engage in direct defense, he denies his adversary the validation they seek. He refuses to play by their rules, to waste his valuable time and resources on their terms. Instead, he conserves his strength, maintaining a posture of unruffled authority. This seemingly passive stance is, in fact, an active declaration of superior power. It communicates without a single word of justification that the accusation is beneath his notice, too trivial to warrant a response, or perhaps so utterly baseless that it deserves only contemptuous silence. Consider the strategic implications. When you defend, you are inherently on the back foot, reacting. When you choose not to defend, you retain the initiative. You force your opponent to wonder, is he truly impervious? Is there a trap I'm not seeing? Does he possess a strength I underestimate? This uncertainty breeds doubt, and doubt erodes the credibility of the attacker. Moreover, by not defending, you avoid being dragged into the mud. You remain untainted by the very accusations hurled at you, as if they simply cannot adhere to your polished exterior. The mudslinging adheres only to those who choose to wrestle in it. This strategy requires a profound shift in mindset. It demands that one relinquish the comforting illusion of moral vindication and embrace the cold, hard calculus of strategic advantage. It means understanding that your objective is not to be found innocent by a jury of your peers, but to maintain and expand your power in the relentless arena of human ambition. The true prince does not seek to be loved for his purity, but to be respected, and if necessary, feared, for his efficacy. He recognizes that a prince must be able to do evil if circumstances warrant it. In this context, evil might simply be the ruthless refusal to play the victim, the calculated decision to let others wallow in their own narratives while you meticulously construct yours. This is the fundamental lesson Machiavelli offers. Abandon the naive hope that truth will triumph on its own merits. Instead, actively sculpt the perception of truth. Do not defend yourself from the narratives others construct. Instead, construct your own, so robust and compelling that it renders all opposing narratives impotent. For the power to define reality, to control what is believed, is the ultimate power. For love is a bond of obligation, which men, being base, break when it serves their purpose. But fear is maintained by a dread of punishment which never fails. Comment: Power respects power, to grasp this truth, and subscribe for the next lessons on statecraft. Having stripped away the illusion of defensive posturing, we now delve deeper into the arsenal of the astute ruler, the very bedrock upon which lasting influence is forged. Machiavelli, with his piercing insight into human affairs, understood that power is not a gift, nor is it merely inherited. It is acquired through a sophisticated interplay of cunning, strength, and an unflinching grasp of reality. Here, we examine the foundational concepts from The Prince that, when applied with precision, allow one to transcend the reactive cycle of defense and instead become the architect of one's own narrative and dominion. The first and perhaps most subtle of these pillars is the mastery of appearances. Machiavelli famously asserted that everyone sees what you appear to be, few know what you really are. In the context of our discussion, the strategic avoidance of self-defense, this principle becomes paramount. The ordinary individual believes that to refute an accusation, one must reveal the truth. The Machiavellian strategist understands that the truth is often less impactful than the perception of truth, especially when that perception is meticulously sculpted to serve one's objectives. When assailed by calumny, the novice fumbles for facts, the master fortifies his image. Imagine a towering fortress, its walls unbreachable, its flags flying high. When a pebble is flung against its ramparts, Does the entire garrison rush out to explain its structural integrity? No. The fortress stands, its very presence a testament to its invulnerability, rendering the pebble's impact irrelevant. Similarly, a well-cultivated public image, one of unwavering competence, unassailable integrity, regardless of private machinations, or profound focus on a larger mission, acts as an impervious shield. When minor accusations or criticisms are hurled, they glance off this formidable facade without truly penetrating. The public, observing this steadfastness, often dismisses the attacks as petty, envious, or simply misguided. The prince doesn't just not defend, he cultivates an aura that makes defense unnecessary. His perceived character, meticulously crafted over time, becomes his most formidable advocate, silently discrediting any narrative that seeks to diminish him. This demands consistent, deliberate projection of desired traits: mercy, faith, humanity, religious observance, not necessarily as innate virtues, but as external attributes consistently displayed for public consumption. Each public act, each carefully worded statement, each strategic silence serves as a brushstroke on the canvas of this grand illusion, gradually solidifying a reputation that is nearly impervious to casual assaults. The strength of this appearance lies in its consistency and its ability to absorb and neutralize external negativity without ever engaging directly. It is a psychological defense system where the sheer weight of established perception renders opposing claims weightless. Secondly, we turn to the iconic duality of the lion and the fox. This metaphor encapsulates the two essential facets of the successful ruler: the brute force and intimidation of the lion, and the cunning and subtlety of the fox. When an adversary launches an attack, the naive might respond with the frantic scrabbling of a cornered animal, attempting to justify or appease. The Machiavellian, however, assesses the nature of the threat and deploys the appropriate beast. The lion aspect suggests a refusal to be trifled with, a formidable presence that deters lesser challenges through sheer unspoken authority. It's the silent, piercing gaze that conveys, "You do not threaten me, you merely expose your own folly." This isn't about physical might, but about the projection of an unshakable will and a capacity for swift, decisive retaliation should the need arise. It deters further, more serious aggressions. But the lion, while powerful, can be trapped. This is where the fox becomes indispensable. The fox does not meet aggression head-on. It evades, misdirects, and exploits the weaknesses of its hunter. When one chooses not to defend, one is, in essence, employing the fox's cunning. Instead of engaging in a fruitless battle of words, the fox seeks to understand the trap, the true intent behind the accusation, the weakness it aims to expose, the resource it seeks to deplete. Then, with ingenious misdirection, the fox flips the script. This might involve subtly shifting the focus away from the accusation and onto a greater, more compelling vision. It might involve exposing the true, often self-serving, motivations of the accuser, thereby discrediting the source of the attack. Or it might be a masterful act of strategic silence, a refusal to grant the accusation the oxygen of a response, allowing it to suffocate in its own irrelevance. The fox never gets caught in a direct confrontation. It orchestrates the environment so that the confrontation never truly occurs on disadvantageous terms. This requires acute perception, the ability to see beyond the immediate provocation and anticipate the broader strategic implications. It means not just dodging the attack, but turning the attacker's momentum against them, using their own aggression as a tool for your advancement. Finally, and most controversially, we confront the use of cruelty. Machiavelli distinguished between cruelties well used and ill used. While he discussed literal acts of violence for securing a new state, this principle holds profound metaphorical weight in the realm of reputation and strategy. Well-used cruelties are those executed swiftly, decisively, and only when absolutely necessary, applied all at once to secure the position, minimizing prolonged resentment. Ill-used cruelties are those that are prolonged, haphazard, and designed to constantly harass, generating instability and widespread hatred. In our context, choosing not to defend oneself can be a form of well-used cruelty against one's detractors. How so? By refusing to defend, you are denying your opponent the very thing they desire: your attention, your energy, and the validation that their attack has landed. This can be a cruel blow to their ego and their strategy. It is a swift, decisive act of disregard that can instantly deflate their efforts. Furthermore, the strategic flipping of the script, turning the tables on an accuser without ever engaging in a defensive posture, can be a form of well-applied strategic cruelty. This might manifest as an immediate, devastating countermove that exposes a hypocrisy, reveals a deeper flaw in the accuser's character, or redirects public scrutiny entirely onto their own actions. Such a move, executed with precision and without the emotional baggage of self-defense, acts like a surgical strike. It resolves the immediate threat by neutralizing the source rather than patching up the damage. It is an act of power that establishes boundaries and demonstrates that attacks will not only be ignored, but may even be turned into a weapon against the aggressor. This is not about prolonged harassment, but about a decisive, one-time blow that re-establishes dominance and discourages future incursions. It's the act of cutting off the snake's head rather than trying to bandage the bite. Let's illustrate these principles with practical, albeit hypothetical, examples. Consider a corporate leader falsely accused of mismanagement. The idealist would launch an internal investigation, issue detailed press releases, and engage in public debates to clear their name. This drains resources, creates a media circus, and keeps the accusation in the public eye. The Machiavellian leader, however, would immediately ensure their core operations are functioning flawlessly, reinforcing their appearances of competence, perhaps subtly leak information about a significant new strategic acquisition or a groundbreaking product launch, employing the fox to shift narrative focus, and in rare, opportune moments, deliver a concise, unshakable statement about their unwavering commitment to the company's success, never directly addressing the accusation, but making it appear trivial in comparison to their greater contributions, a form of well-used strategic cruelty against the accuser's relevance. The accusation, lacking a target to engage, quickly loses momentum and fades, overshadowed by the leader's continued, undeniable impact and carefully maintained image. The script is flipped not by defending the old narrative, but by writing a new, more compelling one. Or consider a political figure facing a baseless smear campaign. The typical response involves issuing rebuttals, hiring legal teams, and engaging in public sparring. This plays directly into the opponent's hands, making the politician appear embattled and defensive. A Machiavellian approach would involve ignoring the specifics of the smear, denying the accuser's power, while simultaneously leveraging a pre-existing strong public image of being a man of the people or an uncompromising reformer, appearances. Instead of debating the accusation, the politician might orchestrate a highly visible, impactful public initiative directly benefiting their constituents, demonstrating their genuine dedication and making the smear look like a desperate, irrelevant distraction. Fox. If the smear artist persists, a precisely timed public exposure of their own past misdeeds or obvious political motivations could serve as a decisive cruelty, neutralizing their credibility in one fell swoop without ever having to acknowledge or defend against their initial attack. The objective is not to prove innocence, but to demonstrate superiority, control, and an unshakable will. These strategies, while seemingly counterintuitive to the morally inclined, reveal the profound superiority of pragmatic action over paralyzing idealism. They understand that in the arena of power, perception is currency, and control over the narrative is the ultimate prize. By mastering appearances, embodying the cunning of the fox, and deploying strategic cruelty when necessary, the prince transforms every attack from a threat into an opportunity, a chance not merely to survive, but to solidify his dominion and write his own enduring legend. The game is not about fighting fairly, it is about winning. Having explored the foundational principles that allow a prince to transcend the reactive cycle of defense, we now turn our attention to the inner workings of the strategist's mind and the meticulous artistry required to manage the grand spectacle of public opinion. This segment delves into the profound internal struggle one must conquer and the sophisticated manipulation of perception necessary to wield true authority. The stage is set, the audience is humanity itself, and every action, every calculated inaction is a performance designed to reinforce power. The first, and perhaps most challenging battle for any aspiring prince, is an internal war. It is the fierce struggle against one's own ingrained moral conditioning, the natural human urge for fairness, transparency, and the need to be understood. To embrace the Machiavellian stance of not defending oneself requires an almost monastic detachment from conventional morality. The urge to justify, to explain, to correct perceived falsehoods is deeply ingrained. It stems from a desire for acceptance, for vindication, for the affirmation of one's inherent goodness. But the true strategist recognizes these desires as weaknesses, emotional vulnerabilities that can be exploited by an astute adversary. The prince must ruthlessly purge his mind of sentimentality. He must understand that the good of his objective, the maintenance of his state, his position, his influence, far outweighs the personal gratification of being morally right. This demands a cold analytical perspective on every decision. When an accusation is leveled, the internal dialogue must not be, "How do I prove them wrong?" but rather, "How does this accusation serve or threaten my strategic aims? How can I neutralize it or even repurpose it without expending unnecessary capital?" This mental fortitude, this unwavering focus on the ultimate objective, is the first and most crucial victory. Without it, the strategist is merely an idealist in disguise, perpetually vulnerable to emotional manipulation. He must become a detached observer of his own feelings, recognizing them as potential liabilities in the ruthless pursuit of power. The ability to endure calumny, to let falsehoods hang in the air without flinching, is a testament to an inner strength that few possess. This composure under fire, this refusal to be drawn into an emotional skirmish, is itself a powerful statement of invincibility, a silent declaration that one operates on a higher plane, beyond the petty squabbles of lesser individuals. Once this internal discipline is established, the strategist can effectively engage in the manipulation of public perception. This is where the wisdom of Machiavel shines brightest, particularly in his dissection of the dilemma, whether it is better to be loved or feared. His conclusion, often oversimplified and misunderstood, is profound. It is much safer to be feared than loved if one of the two has to be wanting. For love is a chain of obligation, which, men being base, is broken whenever it serves their purpose. But fear is maintained by a dread of punishment, which never fails. In the context of not defending oneself, this insight is crucial. When you defend, you implicitly appeal for understanding, for sympathy, for love or acceptance. You seek to re-establish a bond of trust. But as Machiavel observes, such bonds are fragile and easily severed. When you refuse to defend, especially in the face of accusation, you are not necessarily seeking to be hated. Rather, you are cultivating an aura of respect so profound and a sense of consequence so tangible that disobedience or further attacks become unthinkable. The objective is to instill a healthy, pervasive apprehension, a respect so deep that challenging your authority or reputation appears not merely unwise but perilous. Consider the psychological impact. An unaddressed accusation, when met with a calm, unyielding front, forces the accuser and the audience to confront the source of the authority. Why isn't he responding? Is he so powerful that he doesn't need to? Is the accusation so trivial it doesn't warrant his attention? Or does he possess a hidden strength, a concealed capacity for retaliation that makes direct confrontation ill-advised? This ambiguity, this quiet defiance, creates a psychological void that fear, rather than love, is more likely to fill. It's not about being a tyrant, but about projecting an image of such formidable control that your detractors shrink from engaging directly. They may not love you, but they will think twice before challenging you, for fear of the unseen, unstated consequences. This calculated indifference to the immediate fray is a masterclass in psychological warfare, a silent assertion of dominance that resonates more deeply than any verbal defense. Building upon this, the strategist must meticulously focus on constructing the facade. Every public action, every interaction, And indeed, every strategic non-action must be a calculated performance designed to reinforce the desired reputation. This is not about being genuinely virtuous. It is about appearing merciful, faithful, humane, religious, and upright. The specific virtues to display will vary depending on the context and the audience, but the consistency of their projection is paramount. When accusations are made, instead of engaging in the futile act of defense, the prince redoubles his efforts in acts that demonstrate his desired qualities. If accused of avarice, he might announce a significant philanthropic endeavor. If accused of weakness, he might execute a bold, decisive policy that showcases his strength. These actions are not reactive apologies. They are proactive statements that overshadow and implicitly nullify the accusations without ever acknowledging them. The facade becomes so robust, so consistently maintained, that it forms a protective layer around the prince, deflecting arrows of criticism as if they were made of straw. The reputation in this light is not merely an armor, it is also a potent weapon. It is the most powerful tool for controlling the judgment of the people. When a ruler's reputation for impartiality is unshakable, an accusation of bias loses its bite. When a leader is widely seen as a shrewd negotiator, claims of incompetence are easily dismissed. The public, conditioned by a steady stream of carefully curated appearances, will naturally interpret ambiguous events in a light favorable to the established facade. They will rationalize away inconsistencies, preferring the comforting narrative of the strong leader to the unsettling prospect of a flawed one, especially if that leader consistently projects an image of unwavering commitment to their collective well-being. This creates a psychological barrier, a filter through which all information about the prince is processed, making it exceedingly difficult for any opposing narrative to gain traction. The prince doesn't just manage his image, he manages the very lens through which he is viewed. Furthermore, by refusing to defend, the prince avoids the appearance of panic or desperation. A leader who is constantly justifying himself appears insecure, suggesting that the accusations might hold some truth. Conversely, a leader who stands firm, seemingly unbothered by the noise, projects an image of profound confidence and self-assurance. This unwavering demeanor contributes to the facade of invincibility, reinforcing the idea that he is above the fray, his destiny unaffected by the petty squabbles of his detractors. This psychological advantage is invaluable. It disheartens opponents, convinces followers, and pacifies the neutral masses. Ultimately, the theater of power is a relentless performance where the stakes are absolute. The prince who masters this stage understands that truth is malleable, perception is paramount, and the greatest weapon against calumny is not a spirited defense, but an unassailable, meticulously constructed facade, backed by an iron will and a detached strategic mind. It is through this disciplined control of self and perception that the prince not only survives attacks, but transforms them into opportunities to further solidify his unchallengeable authority. You have absorbed the grim reality of human nature and the indispensable instruments of power. You now grasp that the conventional impulse to defend oneself is a strategic misstep, a concession of control to your adversaries. You understand the profound efficacy of cultivating an unshakable facade and leveraging the subtle yet potent forces of perception and fear. Now, before we unveil how to solidify your legacy and transform transient attacks into enduring strengths, ensure your allegiance is pledged by subscribing, for the ultimate wisdom is reserved for those willing to act, not merely observe. The true architect of power does not just survive the storm, he reshapes the landscape with its fury. The journey from passive defense to active narrative control culminates in the execution and timing of a decisive move, the masterstroke. This is not a haphazard reaction, but an act of supreme virtue, where skill, courage, and strategic foresight converge to seize a window of opportunity, often presented by fortuna, circumstance, or luck. An accusation, rather than being an obstacle, can become the very catalyst for this reassertion of dominance. The prince does not merely ignore the attack, he uses the distraction it creates, or the very platform it provides, to deliver a blow that fundamentally reconfigures the power dynamic. It is not merely a counterpunch, it is a seismic shift, an act that fundamentally alters the terms of engagement, leaving the previous assault irrelevant. Machiavelli famously advised, "Injuries ought to be done all at one time, so that being tasted less, they offend less, and benefits ought to be made little by little so that they may be savored more." Applied to our strategy, the masterstroke should embody this principle. When you execute your decisive move, whether it's the removal of a rival, the instatement of new advantageous policies, or a grand public declaration that overshadows all petty criticisms, it must be done swiftly, completely, and with an air of absolute inevitability. This injury to your opponent's agenda, or the benefit to your own, should be so comprehensive that it leaves no room for lingering doubt or prolonged resistance. The aim is to deliver a definitive statement of power, a fait accompli that establishes a new order and renders previous machinations obsolete. Imagine a chess grandmaster, seemingly passive as his opponent makes an aggressive move. The novice might defend a pawn. The master, however, sees 3 moves ahead. He allows the opponent's aggressive piece to advance, knowing it exposes a critical vulnerability. Then, with a single unanticipated move, he executes a checkmate or captures a far more valuable piece, rendering the opponent's earlier attack utterly meaningless. This is the essence of the Machiavellian masterstroke. It leverages the opponent's aggression not by defending, but by using it as a fulcrum for a far more devastating and proactive assertion of one's own will. This requires immense foresight, a deep understanding of human psychology, and the courage to act boldly when the moment presents itself, disregarding the noise of immediate criticism. It is a moment of pure, distilled virtue. Following this decisive action comes the critical phase of consolidation and the new order. The true victory is not merely in silencing a detractor or neutralizing an attack. It is in establishing a lasting stability that withstands the caprices of time and fortune. The prince, having executed his masterstroke, does not rest on his laurels. Instead, he immediately turns his attention to entrenching the foundations of his newly asserted power. This means creating institutions, forging alliances, or enacting reforms that solidify his position and perpetuate his influence beyond the immediate event. If the masterstroke involved discrediting an influential critic, the consolidation might involve not just their public ruin, but the systemic dismantling of their network, the promotion of loyalists into key positions, and the reinforcement of ideologies that support the prince's narrative. If it was the implementation of a new policy, consolidation involves ensuring its effective execution, demonstrating its benefits to the populace, and perhaps subtly framing any remaining opposition as archaic or detrimental to the collective good. The goal is to build a state, whether it's a literal political entity, a dominant market position, an unassailable professional legacy, or a formidable personal reputation, that is not only robust enough to weather future storms, but also self-perpetuating. This phase is about establishing an equilibrium that favors the prince, making his authority seem natural, inevitable, and unchallengeable. It's about creating structures and precedents that reinforce the new power dynamic, transforming a temporary victory into a permanent advantage. The benefits of the masterstroke must be diffused gradually, little by little, allowing them to be savored more by the beneficiaries, thereby cultivating a loyal base that perceives the prince as their benefactor and protector. This careful cultivation ensures that the initial decisive action blossoms into long-term stability and widespread acceptance of the new order. The prince becomes not just a victor, but a founder, an architect of lasting influence. We conclude with a profound philosophical reflection on the nature of power. The ultimate power, as Machiavelli revealed, is not a question of innate goodness or inherent evil. These are mere labels, often applied by those who misunderstand the ruthless demands of governance and control. Power, in its purest form, is efficacy. It is the unyielding capacity to perceive the world not as a realm of moral absolutes, but as a crucible of competing interests, fluctuating loyalties, and ever-present dangers. It is the courage to act in accordance with this unvarnished vision, to make the difficult, often unpopular decisions necessary to secure order and stability in a world that is inherently chaotic and unpredictable. The prince who masters the art of non-defense and the execution of the masterstroke is not necessarily a villain, nor is he a saint. He is a realist. He is the individual who dares to look beyond the comforting illusions of how things should be and grapples with the brutal truth of how things are. He understands that true leadership often demands actions that defy conventional morality, not out of malice but out of a pragmatic necessity to safeguard his objectives and his dominion. His legacy is not built on accolades of virtue, but on the enduring strength and stability of the throne he constructs, a position, an influence, a lasting impact that resists the corrosive effects of time and the relentless assaults of his adversaries. This is the ultimate triumph, to not merely survive but to build a reign, a structure of authority that stands firm, unmoved by the ephemeral winds of criticism, and endures for generations.